What's up, Taiwan? I'm Tiffany Wong with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Taiwan is bracing for potential tariffs from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. The head of the central bank is warning that if Trump follows through on his campaign promises, trade conflicts could escalate around the world. Joyce Sung joins us now from our newsroom. Joyce, how is Taiwan preparing?
The head of Taiwan's central bank is cautious but confident that Taiwan's economy will be able to stay the course and remain strong even as Donald Trump enters the White House for a second term. Yang Jinglong fielded questions from concerned lawmakers about the aggressive tariffs Trump vowed to impose while he was campaigning. That includes 60% tariffs on Chinese goods and even a possible 10% universal tariff on all U.S. imports. Trump even directly targeted Taiwan, falsely accusing it of stealing the U.S. semiconductor industry. Last year, Taiwan posted over $50 billion in trade surplus with the U.S. as the major supplier of expensive advanced chips for tech giants like NVIDIA and Apple. Lawmakers asked Yang whether this would make Taiwan a target of Trump's sanctions. Yang says that he's confident that the U.S. needs the country's technology.
对全球来讲呢，它会有冲击。我们这两个国家的一个合作呢，是两翼的，是很好的。因为说实在的，它是设计，我们是制造，而且我们的这个制造呢，又是非常先进的，是它需要我们的产品。
Taiwan's economy has been growing in recent years off the back of booming applications of artificial intelligence, which runs on the cutting-edge chips that Taiwan dominates in. Looking back at Trump's first term, Yang also observed that Taiwan benefited from the U.S.-China trade war that Trump started, but says that it would be wrong to assume that a second term would be more of the same. Yang says that Taiwan must closely monitor and adapt to Trump's policies, which are still in the works.
Right, thanks, Joyce. Well, I'm sure we'll have more on this in the coming weeks. And we've already seen Vice Premier Zheng Lijun form an ad hoc group to strengthen cooperation with the new U.S. administration. That was Joyce Sung live in Taipei. U.S. President Joe Biden and President-elect Donald Trump have promised an orderly transition of power as they met for the first time since the U.S. election.
Politics is tough, and it's in many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jill.
The historic meeting in the Oval Office came after Trump's decisive election win against Democratic candidate Kamala Harris. Trump and Biden discussed domestic and national security issues, as well as Biden's stance on the Ukraine-Russia war. The Republican Party has now won enough seats to control the House of Representatives as well as a majority in the Senate. It means Trump will have significant power to rule on key issues on his agenda, including the economy and immigration. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has picked Tulsi Gabbard as his Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard left the Democratic Party in 2022 and is now a Republican. She is currently a lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard Reserve. She also ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020. The pick comes just a few days after Trump chose Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth as his Secretaries of State and Defense. Many observers say that Trump's latest string of nominations point toward a harder stance on China. For more on what the new U.S. administration might mean for Taiwan, Jaime Okan spoke to Lauren Dickey, a non-resident fellow with the China Power Project in Washington, D.C.
Lauren, looking at these picks that Trump has made so far, with Tulsi Gabbard leading intelligence, a new Secretary of Defense with Pete Hegseth, and maybe most notable, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, what do you make of these picks in terms of Taiwan's defense?
I think for Taiwan, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't really know a lot about the Secretary of Defense nominee. He is obviously a TV host, but brings close ties to Trump to the picture, and that might be sort of his role is just to be Trump's guy in the Pentagon. But I think for Taiwan, the one that is really interesting is Rubio, Senator Rubio, his nomination for Secretary of State. And so if you look at Rubio's track record, right, he proposed several bills in recent history that are all very friendly towards Taiwan and help advance the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. You have to remember, too, that he's sanctioned by China. So there's a big question mark over whether or how he might be able to travel to China to engage his counterparts in his role. So in that environment, yes, he is a China hawk, and I think we can expect him to take that vantage point in his role, assuming he's confirmed. But I think the nature of how he's become a China hawk has also sharpened his focus on Taiwan and the U.S.-Taiwan relationship.
There's been a lot of pressure on Taiwan to increase its defense spending, but now with Trump coming in, how big is that pressure going to be?
So if Trump or others, President-elect Trump or others have said 10% is the threshold they want Taiwan to hit, there is a good chance that they will try and pursue that. But I think they will probably encounter, frankly, a bit of reality as they settle into their roles and realize how hard it will be for Taiwan not only to hit that 10% target of GDP, there would be huge trade-offs required and a tough negotiation with the LY, the Legislative Yuan as well. But the U.S. defense industrial base would also have to keep a pace. And the challenge we have today under the current administration is that the U.S. defense industrial base can't meet the supply-demand pressures of Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan all at the same time, as well as our other allies and partners. I think a lower number, like 5%, is more realistic, but there would still be huge trade-offs within Taiwan's system.
And do you see any other obstacles ahead when it comes to the U.S. and Taiwan cooperating in security?
So as this new administration settles in and learns, frankly, what the last administration has done before them, they probably need to consider, like, how much is too much or when is too much? Because if the U.S. is selling things to Taiwan and they're just landing on island, but not being integrated in a useful, frankly, way to build deterrence, because Taiwan has no bandwidth to train on more stuff. That's also not I would argue, in the U.S. interest. You want to make sure that the stuff that we're selling from the U.S. side goes to Taiwan and immediately goes into use.
That was Lauren Dickey, a non-resident fellow with the China Power Project. The government needs to do more to support working parents in order to address the country's low birth rate. That's what childcare policy advocates are urging, saying mothers should not be solely responsible for raising children. Taiwan is facing a double-edged population crisis, plummeting birth rates, and a rapidly aging society. The country is on track to become a super-aged society next year, boosting concerns that policies to increase the birth rate also need some major reforms. One Child Care Advocacy Alliance says they have a solution.
公共托育才重要，公共托育才重要，延长育婴津贴吃不到，有弹性才重要，有弹性才重要。
This group advocates for solutions to keep mothers in the workforce so that women do not have to choose between their career and having children, and do not disproportionately take on the burden of caregiving responsibilities.
那稳定工作是生育的前提。 但是台湾政府一味地反其道而行。
They're calling for expanded public childcare services up to the age of 12, more flexible paid parental leave with job protection that encourages fathers to play an equal role in childcare, and keep women in the workforce to make childcare easier in dual-income families. They brought their suggestions to legislators who recently discussed possible reforms to the parental leave system. Currently, employees with children are given 7 days of unpaid family care leave per year, but advocates say few parents use it, fearing a drop in salary or eventually getting laid off. But making changes into policy may take time.
是否增订以小时为单位的有薪亲职假，影响的层面很广泛，我们还需要收集各界的意见来审慎衡酌。
But time is ticking for Taiwan as the population continues to set new records in ways that may jeopardize the country's future. Chris Ma and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus. World leaders are gathering in Peru's capital Lima for this year's APEC forum. The 21 member states from across the Pacific are set to discuss global economics, tech, and sustainability. Among the delegation is former Economy Minister Lin Xinyi, representing Taiwan under the name Chinese Taipei. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are scheduled to meet alongside the forum on Saturday for the first time since last year's summit. They're expected to discuss Russia's war in Ukraine, the South China Sea, cybersecurity, and Taiwan. As world leaders gather in Peru, protesters take to the streets to highlight issues they're facing at home. Reese Ayers reports from Lima.
Police are out in force here in the streets of Lima as protests and strikes begin, deliberately coinciding with APEC 2024 hosted here in Peru, where world leaders will come together for one of the world's biggest international economic forums. Protesters have gathered here in central Lima near the country's Congress, angry with a rise in organized crime and extortion attacks across Peru.
Ellos no nos cuidan a nosotros, ellos cuidan a los delincuentes que están en el Congreso, en el gobierno, a los extorsionadores de la calle, ellos cuidan a ellos.
Acá, por ejemplo, este gobierno es dictatorial, no quiere críticas, ¿no?
Ahora estoy buscando justicia, como si acá que lograr seguir hasta el último, hacer justicia queremos nosotros. Y ahorita nos deprime policía.
Peruvian leaders anticipated these protests, deploying thousands of police across the city and closing roads. A spokesperson for the president even referring to the potential protesters as traitors to the country.
Todo aquel que convoque a una paralización en los días donde se realice el foro APEC es un traidor a los intereses de la patria.
Strikes and protests are expected to continue throughout the week and possibly grow in size and move closer to the venues hosting this year's APEC forum, where at the end of the summit, world leaders will gather to release a joint declaration. Scott Huang, Harel Hughes, and Rees in Lima, Peru for TaiwanPlus.
Tune into TaiwanPlus News all this week for more coverage of APEC. One person is dead and 4 are injured after a walkway collapsed in the famous tourist hotspot Alishan. The 5 people were standing on a 3-meter-high sightseeing platform when it gave way. The structure is next to the Fume Suspension Bridge in Alishan, a mountainous scenic area in southern Taiwan. They were all sent to a hospital where one woman died of head injuries. A volunteer firefighter has died while attempting to remove a hornet nest in the northwestern city of Taoyuan. The 36-year-old was attacked by a swarm of hornets as his team attended the nest removal. The bugs penetrated his protective suit and stung him several times. He later died at the hospital. The attack is one of several prominent cases in the past few years. Experts say that fully sealing protective clothing is key to safety when dealing with hornets.
如果你的袖口没有把它包紧，例如说没有用塑胶袋把它包紧，还有你的鞋子没有把它绑紧，那有可能会从袖口、鞋缝啊，或者是这个领口的地方会钻进去，那这个就会造成蛮大的风险。
Experts are warning residents to stay vigilant amid attack season in summer and autumn. Taiwan has claimed its first victory on opening night of a major international baseball tournament. The WBSC Premier 12 brings together the top 12 international teams every 4 years. Competing under the name Chinese Taipei, Team Taiwan beat South Korea 6-3 with 2 home runs, including a grand slam by outfielder Chen Chenwei. After the game, the team's manager Chen Haozhu says an early lead was pivotal to their win.
我想整场的一个关键，当然你说全垒打让先得分，让整个团队的一个压力先释放出来。那加上玉明他的一个好投，那把整个分数都压制住。
Taiwan is set to play against the Dominican Republic on Thursday night. Thanks for joining us on What's Up Taiwan. Check out the TaiwanPlus website or follow our socials for more of our coverage. Finally, come along with us to Myanmar to check out the annual Festival of Lights, marking the end of the rainy season. I'm Tiffany Wong. Take care and see you next time.